The following podcast is presented for informational and/or entertainment purposes only, with no intent of determining a psychological diagnosis or as a substitute for treatment. If you or anyone you know is struggling with mental health and/or substance abuse issues, call the SAMHSA National Helpline, 1-800-662-HELP, 1-800-662-4357. Learn more from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration online at www.samhsa.gov. Engaging Minds is brought to you by Daranaut Health, addiction coaching and private in-home rehabilitation. Your life, your home, your recovery. Daranauthealth.com.
Hey, this is Dr. G, and welcome to Engaging Minds. Every podcast, we like to look at our world from a deeper and more psychological point of view. Recently, I was very excited to find out that the American Psychological Association sent out a statement regarding the reversal of Roe versus Wade. And what they stated was that the reversal is going to exacerbate mental health issues. Specifically, they cited that decades of research has stated that people who were denied abortion have higher levels of anxiety, lower life satisfaction, lower self-esteem, and increased depression. And what I've also found in my clinical practice is both from men and women, I've seen a heightened sense of hopelessness. People just don't know what to do in this situation. And what I tell them is knowledge is power. And we have to be able to get as much knowledge as we can around this situation to empower us to take action. And with that thought, I'm very excited to bring on a friend and a guest of mine, law professor Julie A. Werner-Simon. This woman is amazing, okay? She is a former federal DOJ prosecutor in Los Angeles and Alaska, a former constitutional law fellow, has a postgraduate degree in constitutional studies, and currently serves as a law professor. So with that introduction, I want to welcome Professor Julie A. Werner-Simon onto the show. Julie Werner-Simon, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gluss. It's a pleasure to be here again with you.
You know, I want to say something that has always stuck on. You know, we met originally when I did my show on KABC. And what I remember more than anything is you brought me a laminated Constitution to
Yes,
the
I
studio.
Yes, I did.
I remember you said to me, guard this with your life. It's going to be really important. And here we are.
And here we are. And here we are about the 14th Amendment in the Constitution. So yes, the Constitution has become very, very important. It's always been, but now people know because they can see how easily a right that we women have had for almost 50 years, with the stroke of a pen or the internet or print, it's been taken away.
You know, as a psychologist, I always look at the history of someone to figure out how they've gotten there, how they've gotten into my office. So tell us, as a nation, how have we gotten here? Like, what happened?
Well, on Friday, June 24th, I love days of the week. Jurors also love that. It anchors them into context. It was a Friday.
Right.
It was Friday, June 24th. It was morning in parts of the nation. And the Supreme Court issued an opinion in which it overturned almost 50 years of precedent. What that means is generations, at least two biblically, of women got to rely on this right, that the healthcare right, the right to decide whether one should carry a pregnancy to term, it was protected by the Constitution from 1973 till Friday, June 24th, 2022. And now that right has evaporated. It's disappeared.
You know what I'm thinking? There's a term in psychology that states that It's a sense of absolutism. And what that means is we experience it, let's say, with 9/11, that we see the world as it is, we get used to it, and then we assume it's always going to be that way. And when that state of mind is taken away, that things that people didn't even think about starts to happen. Their reality changes dramatically, like we saw with 9/11. I can see the same thing happening right now, that our sense of what we thought was absolute and was never going to change has changed. And the result is a tremendous amount of trauma for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
You know?
And you asked, why did this happen?
Yeah,
Why?
I was going to say, why?
Well, basically, it happened because elections have consequences. I mean, as a con law teacher, as an instructor, as a speaker, you joke about me handing out the Constitution, but the Constitution affords us rights. And the reversal of Roe is the direct result of elections. Elections have power. Your vote has power. Why would so many people today in 2022 be trying to take away your vote, to penalize in Georgia, giving a sandwich or a cup of water? That's now a crime. Why would they reduce in Texas one voting box, ballot box in Houston, a city of millions? Why?
So why? Tell us why.
Because elections have consequences. In 2016, the winner of the election, Donald Trump, got to appoint 3 judges to the Supreme Court. Jimmy Carter, in his one term, didn't get to appoint any. And each of those justices had an ideology, and they told us. And their ideology was, hey, look, we think the Constitution should be interpreted as it was in 1787 when the 55 white men, half of whom had slaves, interpreted it, or sometimes what the text says, but only if the text agrees with their ideology. These 3, with the 2 justices that were already there who had that ideology, the 2 being Clarence Thomas, put on the court to replace Thurgood Marshall by George H.W. Bush, the first Bush, and Samuel Alito. Those 2 are there. They have 3 now, the 3 Trump appointees. Plus, you have the Chief Justice who still goes along. That's 6 votes. There are only 9 people. A decision can be made with 5. Only takes 4 to take a case.
So something I agree with you completely. And, something I've heard that disturbs me psychologically from patients and clients sometimes is, well, and I'm thinking of someone specifically, and they say, well, Dr. G, I don't really understand what the big thing is. Someone can just go to another state and get an abortion. And, that really doesn't affect me because I am not a woman. And so I don't really understand what the problem is. It just seems like it's gone from a national issue to a state issue. And I find it disturbing to have that psychology because we know, and we've talked about this can lead to many other rights that we take for granted being taken away. And I think it's a naivete about what has just happened.
I will tell you, the right to travel across state lines is not overtly in the Constitution either. So if the right to abortion is a right that these people, these men and Justice Comey Barrett say doesn't exist, well then what other invisible rights emanate or stem from the 14th Amendment? Well, contraception. Contraception is not a word in the Constitution. So as Associate Justice Clarence Thomas said, hey, we should revisit that too. The right since 1965 for women to have birth control could evaporate. What about the right to equal access to education? Brown versus Board of Education. Equal access to education, that 1954 decision, 9-0. Everybody agreed that right is in the Constitution, even though it's invisible. That right is gone, could be gone too. What about marrying interracially, 1967? That could be gone. The Supreme Court said that was a right in the 14th Amendment. How about same-sex marriage? Same-sex marriage in 2015, that could disappear. And how about sexual intimacy? The court in 2003 said consenting adults could have sexual intimacy. Do you think those men in 1787, the lawyers, the half of whom were slaveholders in Philadelphia, could actually articulate sexual intimacy? All these rights could evaporate in an instant.
And that's what I think brings up a lot of anxiety and fear and PTSD from my point of view of dealing with clients, is that we need to organize our world in a way that we believe we understand it. And when you talk about that stuff, Professor, it becomes so overwhelming in my head. I feel like this is my knee-jerk reaction. I just want to scream out to you and say, no, that's not true. This is America. It could never happen here. So I feel like I'm going into this denial over what I know is really real to protect myself. And I believe that's a defense that a lot of people do. And it's very dangerous because we can see everything you're saying is very true.
Dr. Gluss, all you have to do is read. And read Clarence Thomas's opinion in Dobbs. It's on the web everywhere. It's been recounted. Clarence Thomas, the Associate Justice, the justice who replaced civil rights icon Thurgood Marshall, said the court should revisit all cases built on similar legal footing.
Oh, I believe you, Professor. I'm just saying my natural psychological response, and I see it from other people too.
You want to be in denial.
I just want to, that's what I'm trying to say.
Look,
I just want to go to the place. It's not true. It's America. It can't happen here.
Look, I want to be in denial too. But guess what? I teach law students, I teach lawyers, and I can't be in denial because, check this out, the cases that came out in the last 8 days of this Supreme Court were so out of bounds, upside down, that the uniform bar examiners alerted states, we are not going to test on this. We're not going to test on the fact that 100-year-old gun law in New York has now been where you had to show justification to open carry in the streets has been invalidated. Black people on that Sunday after Roe's reversal, that Black people in Louisiana, who are 1/3 of the population, will only have 1/6 of the voting power. We'll put them all in one district. That Indians, Native Americans, indigenous people that 2 years before were told, listen, you have jurisdiction over everybody that comes on the reservation. Not anymore. South Dakota can come in and take out or prosecute whoever they want. You don't. And the Environmental Protection Agency, oh yeah? The word in 1970, Richard Nixon's act, Environmental Protection Agency, the Environmental Protection Agency cannot protect the country from greenhouse gases.
So where do you think this, I'm listening to everything you're saying. And again, part of me wants to
let's go in a hole.
Stop. It's really scary, to be very honest. And I notice how much my behavior changed. I used to watch a lot of the news shows and I find myself getting overwhelmed. I'll just look at a lot of stories on my phone and then I'll pick and choose because I have to keep some boundaries in order to function, basically. And I keep thinking about what's the core of this fear? Like, what is causing this country to, have such extreme behavior? Or has it always been there, but now there's permission for it to happen?
Dr. Gluss?
Any thoughts on that?
Dr. Gluss, we've been here before. I mean, except for taking away the right of people to have slaves, and that took a civil war, and the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th amendments, that the South, in order to get back into the Union after they lost, they had to agree to. Except for taking away slavery, we haven't had this where a right that half the population, 330 million people, has been taken away. And so we've been here before. Slavery was a really big deal in America, and it did cause the Civil War. So where we are now, it's a new Civil War. And I think that the fear
Do you feel it's more of a cultural war, like almost like a psychological war
Well,
of differences?
well, I think it's a political war, and it's a political war against women, minorities, gays. People are staking out their turf. And so, look, it's this way because people are even misinterpreting. Republicans are vilifying critical race theory. Critical race theory is just an idea. Criticism, Socratically, as a lawyer, is let's evaluate. Like, let's go to the movies and say it's a good movie or a bad movie. It's not you're like fat or something. It's critical. It's analysis. Race is a construct. Your brain size, your nose doesn't predetermine your intellect. And theory is what we all do before we have data. The fact that the Republicans have vilified that concept, and the synonym of that concept is American constitutional history. That document that I gave you years ago, that I hand out, that I keep in my purse as I travel across America, that Constitution that the 55 white men from 12 of the 13 colonies, Rhode Island didn't want to participate, but that document has 3 original sins that we're still dealing with. What are they? What are the original sins that are imprinted? I don't know, maybe psychologically on our DNA. You would know that. I don't know that. I only know law and history. Is this 1, the 3/5 clause? Black people were 3/5 of white people for the purpose of representation and taxation. That meant 5 of the first 6 presidents of the United States came from Virginia because Virginia had the most slaves. The second sin, the sin, was that in order to get this Constitution together, to have these people sign off on it in 1787, slavery, the importation of stolen humans, would still exist for another 20 years. Yes, our document, that Constitution says slavery will continue for another 20 years till 1808. And third sin, you can use the arm of the government to take back your fugitive property if your property crosses state lines. Do you know that there's fighting words in states like Florida that have banished critical race theory? I could be penalized if I went there and talked to 3rd graders about this. So you ask me.
Yeah, go ahead.
You ask me, so why? So what's going on here? Well, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I am a lawyer, a professor, a mother, a Jew, and I can tell you it's fear. It is fear that somehow people are better than you or they're going to get more than you, and that is human. And that is why we have governments. Governments are designed, ideally, not, oppressive governments, to address your field, to keep you safe, to, have your teachers, to give you a police force, and let you have your life. But now there are people who fear, they're in fear that somebody's going to take their stuff.
Professor, I agree with you 100%. I'm going to sort of add a psychological dimension to everything you're saying.
Wow.
Well, I think you're 100% right, because when people are in fear, okay, when something they believe is absolute, and we've just gotten through COVID, kind of. And that has changed. Yeah, kind of. We're still not sure.
I'm wearing a mask everywhere.
Are we through it? I'm not sure. Should I wear a mask? I'm not wearing a mask. I mean, there's a lot of, now monkeypox is coming along, and who knows what's around the corner. So we live in a fearful time when you think about it. Again, before COVID happened, I don't know about you, but I never really thought about something like that happening, a pandemic. And here I was in a pandemic living in California. I thought about earthquakes. I thought about fires, but I didn't really think about a pandemic. So again, this absolutism that we believe in this world, that things are concrete and they never change. It's like we've experienced this psychological earthquake, this metaphorical metaphorical earthquake. And so what people naturally do a lot of times is they want an absolute truth. They don't want to look at gray areas. So it's great to demonize, I'll demonize women, I'll demonize gays, I'll demonize whatever group you want to pick.
Dr. Glass, it is human nature to demonize the other and what you don't understand and what you don't know.
But you don't want to understand it and don't want to know. That's the
right,
big
because
difference.
there's no excuse now to not know. You can read verifiable, legitimate sources, and that means, yes, newspapers. Why is it that when Nixon was not impeached, but he left office, there was bipartisan support for that? Because every night at 6:30, some guy with gray hair came on and gave you the news that came from legitimate, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Well, that's what I mean about Professor, about trust. We don't even know what the real news is. You can look at, like, who would have, let's be honest, not only was it a surprise about Donald Trump, it's shocking to me that we're still talking about the fact that he may run again. Like, what is going on psychologically in this country to allow it? But those are questions we're going to have to bring you back on for. But here is what I'd like to know. For the person out there that's listening to us, what can they do? What actions can they take to feel empowered right now?
Well, information, legitimate, verifiable information is power. So I urge people not to read or trust Facebook or Instagram or whatever. Read newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, papers. They have to verify. Someone has to vet the information. Also, support your local newspapers. Support your little towns. You live in Santa Monica, read the Santa Monica Daily Express. You live in some towns, support your newspapers. Know what is happening in your community. You also should support organizations that support women's dignity and autonomy. Planned Parenthood. You should support officials, elections of people in offices all across the country. Support people in Congress who want to protect a woman's right to choose. Look, this month alone, 157 Republicans voted against same-sex marriage in Congress. When the contraception bill came up in response to the Supreme Court action, 195 Republicans voted against a woman's right to have contraception. Know this, read this. And finally, finally, know that November is the last shot for several generations to hold the Senate and increase seats, to hold the House of Representatives, and while Biden is in office, put in an agenda that supports women's rights. That's it.
And again, my role as a psychologist to add to that people are empowered when they're in groups, when they feel the support that they're getting. If you start isolating about these issues and you start feeling too fearful, you're not going to be able to feel empowered. So being able to talk about it, like having this amazing experience with you, it's so knowledgeable, and be able to share it with other people. I'm going to actually bring that Constitution back out and put it back on my desk there you go, to remind me of you. And that's coming as a Canadian. So both a Canadian and an American. So I feel very deeply about this country because I chose to be a citizen.
Right.
I wasn't born into it, and I wanted to be a citizen because I felt this was a country I really belonged to. And I still want to have that feeling. So I want to go ahead.
Dr. Glass, I urge everybody to read the Constitution so they know what's in there, and to read American Constitution Society. That talks about the very things that I've discussed. Read reliable.
I'm going to add to that as we end the podcast for right now, and we'll have to have you back on again for an update. I love when you say get the right information. One of the things I always laugh about is patients will come to me and they'll quote all this stuff about diagnosis, mental health. And I go, oh, did you go to Google University? Is that where you got your degree? And I know other psychologists like I will laugh about it because a lot of times that information isn't correct or it's misinterpreted. And that's what you're saying is get knowledge. Knowledge is power, but get it from the right sources.
Verifiable, vetted sources. And I actually bring newspapers to the classroom. I hold them up, I open them up, and I point to data.
So, Professor Julie A. Werner-Simon, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. Your knowledge is so empowering, and I want to thank you because I feel like you're this prophet that's going through the country and just trying to push people out of denial and into reality. So with that...
Listen, I'm not a prophet. No, I just want to tell you, I'm every person. Every person can have this knowledge. You have a book, you have a library, you have an internet connection. You can find this.
I get it. So let me give you a compliment. I think you're really courageous. And I thank you for your work. This is Dr. G, and we're here with Engaging Minds. As I said, every week we like to look at our world from a deeper and more psychological point of view.
If you or anyone you know is struggling with mental health and/or substance abuse issues, call the SAMHSA National Helpline, 1-800-662-HELP, 1-800-662-4357. Learn more from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration online at www.samhsa.gov.